Well, hi Nicola, it's really great to have you with us today, and I thought it'd be good to start by just introducing yourself, telling us who you are and then what you do for the Council of the Isles of Scilly.
Okay, thanks Jane, it's lovely to have you over here. I'm Nicola Stinson, I'm Director for Place for the Council of the Isles of Scilly. So as in the description, it's all about the environment, the place, the public realm, the way we operate as a whole island. So all those physical things around the place are my responsibility in this new role. So yeah, exciting because here on the islands you do see everything's interrelated. So it makes sense to organise ourselves around place and people, and my job's around all that infrastructure and the islands as a whole.
So
all the
you're doing
off-islands
place and somebody else is doing people.
So Aisling Khan is
Right.
the director for people, so children's services, adult social care, and also our health and wellbeing through our active Scilly programme as well.
So that's your role for the council, and what does the council more broadly do? What are the responsibilities of the Council of the Isles of Scilly?
So the council, it's a unitary council, but it's sort of a unique unitary council in that for a very small place, serving a population of just over 2,000 people, we operate all the normal services that you'd expect with a council, but we also operate a care home, an airport, the fire and rescue services, and up until last April, a year ago, last April, water and sewage services too. So it's a small place but with a big remit. So as an administrative authority, it's got a very broad remit. So running an airport is quite unusual, and if you think about it, we're about the same scale as a lot of parish councils, so it's a big ask of a small
2,000 people, taxpayers is not very many either to provide that range of services.
Yeah, and that's quite a challenge in terms of funding arrangements.
Yeah, and does that include the school as well, or is the school?
The school's an academy now, so that's run independently as an
Yeah.
academy.
Yeah. That's amazing. So our teaching, our module is about the challenges of environmental change and sustainability, and Scilly is a brilliant place to do that because you can see it all in the landscape. And our physical geography colleagues are talking about glaciation and the slow rise of the sea after glaciation drowning the landscape. But the social scientists among us are thinking about sustainability and what that means. And obviously that's a big part of your role at the council, so we're really keen to hear from you about what the challenges are for sustainably managing the Isles of Scilly.
Yeah, good. I mean, there are a wide range, as you say, and there's the physical, the infrastructure elements to that, and then there's the social side of that, which is our population. And just to give a bit of context, really, is the population of the Isles of Scilly has been in decline, and one of the reasons why the population is in decline is because of a lack of opportunity for housing. So if people can't live and work here in an affordable way, then it's difficult to attract people to come and sustain those services and that infrastructure on the islands as well. So we'll talk about the infrastructure, but always have in mind that we've got these challenges around the people as well who service the islands. So in terms of infrastructure, I suppose the main thing for us is to think about what are the key things we need to live here. Water's a challenge because there are no rivers, so how do we get our water? So that's from rainfall and boreholes and from desalination. So we have two sources and we mix that water supply. It's very expensive to produce desalinated clean water, and for us that was a big challenge as a council, and up until April of 2020 the council ran the water services. But since then, South West Water have taken on that responsibility, and we've been working with them around how we provide a more resilient resource as we move forward. So there's the obvious thing still around leakage, but there's also about rainwater capture. So what do we do in terms of harvesting the rainwater that falls, and how do we use that rainwater in terms of grey water, flushing of toilets, etc., etc. And in the past, we haven't really thought about it. 2 years ago, there was a drought, and as visitors entered the islands, they said, of course it doesn't affect visitors, does it? You know, we're tourists to the islands. Presumably there's a water shortage, but we're tourists, so that's fine, isn't it? And actually we came very close to not having a water supply. And that's the reality of living on an island with a finite resource. So South West Water are working with us on a couple of projects. We've got South West Water doing a rainwater harvesting project, but we're also got an adaptive Scilly project, which is around how we adapt to climate change. and how we can use rainwater harvesting to service our businesses. But a lot of that is also about educating the visitor about the impact they have when they visit the island. So that concept of it doesn't really matter, we're visitors, we're on holiday, it doesn't affect us, does it? Is absolutely, we've got to change the messaging. And it's an expensive place to visit, so people want to come and enjoy themselves, but I think there's a bit about raising awareness on the water supplies. And sewage as well is a massive challenge. We have no sewage treatment facility on the island.
I never thought about that, yeah.
So our raw sewage is pumped out into the sea, which you've got this beauty of the islands, and you can see the colour of the water behind us, it just looks so pristine. But the reality in terms of our infrastructure is it's very fragile, and we haven't got a sewage treatment plant. So South West Water are working with us again to find a site to make sure that we can treat our sewage in an appropriate way so that we aren't discharging raw sewage into the sea. And that was a bit shocking to many people in this such a beautiful landscape,
So
to realise that that still happens
today. Is there one
today.
pipe that takes it far out, or is there several pipes on each island will be doing?
Each island have got their own solution. The one here goes off the garrison at Morning Point. You'll see where the seabirds gather and where the mussels grow. There is that big challenge, and South West Water are going to be investing between 30 and 50 million pounds of infrastructure into the island's water and sewage infrastructure over the coming years. And that's why, as a small council, we just couldn't accommodate that work. We haven't got the capacity or the resource to do that. So we're very grateful that South West Water have taken on that mantle and will help us solve some of those sewage and water issues. There is no blueprint for the solution yet, but the idea is that each island will have its own solution. We had explored as part of the Smart Islands programme the use of sewage as a feed into an anaerobic digester and gasification plant, but we just couldn't get that to work technically. The mix of ammonia, I'm not an expert in this field, but there were some technical issues which meant that it just wouldn't work appropriately, and South West Water's technical engineers were keen to point out that if you're going to put a solution, it's got to work. So that's the challenge that South West Water are working on at the moment, is what is the right solution for the islands. And we worked with a number of different companies to think outside the box as well. So there's a company that were called Wavetricity but called Bellina, who we worked with and put a bid in for European funding. We were unsuccessful, but the principle they were working on is that why not create a new island, a floating barge, a utility platform, and float that facility offshore, service that with, using wind, solar and wave power to create energy, and then use that as a sewage treatment plant. That's not been ruled out yet, and it is quite innovative.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it's one of the options that are still being considered, because on an island that's quite limited in terms of its physical footprint, finding a place for a sewage treatment plant is quite a challenge. So thinking outside the box, thinking what could we do offshore, is also in the equation as well. So I think in a small place, you've just got to think differently sometimes about what the solutions
And maybe
might
it
be.
forces you to innovate faster than other places because of that.
It's by necessity.
Yeah.
And if you think about it logically, what are we short of? Land. So what do? You create land offshore. So it's a sensible solution when you think it through, but it's quite challenging in terms of the connectivity between those points. So it's one option that's still been explored.
Yeah. So that's water. What about energy?
So our ambition has always been, looking at the sunshine today, is to use our natural resources. There's solar energy, there's wind energy, and there's tidal and wave energy here. So absolutely, we've got potentially a whole suite of opportunities to make this island completely independent and using renewable energy. At the moment, we have an interconnector with the mainland for our electricity supply. There's no gas on the island, it's electricity only. And in 2016 or 17, that interconnector was broken, a vessel went through and unfortunately cut the cable. That caused quite an issue for Western Power, but residents didn't notice because we've got a backup generator supply here on the islands that's diesel powered. And that started to bring to the fore the thought that probably diesel's not the way forward. What is it? How could the islands be independent of that need for that interconnector? How could we resource ourselves for renewable energy on island? So at the moment we've had a couple of projects. We've worked with Hitachi on small energy islands, which has been around looking at renewable energy use on our social homes, so solar power, air source heat pumps, and also working with businesses through our business energy efficiency scheme to allow them to improve energy efficiency but also put renewable energy on their properties. So I can see one just up there where Nicola have just put on some solar power on their properties. So we've had quite an increase in solar power recently. We've also put solar panels through that programme on our commercial sites. So if you look at our waste site, we've got solar panels there. We've got solar panels up at the airport. There's a small solar panel garden up there. So we've looked at what facilities the council have, and also the South West Water desalination plant, we've got panels there, and said what can we do with solar. So we've used that resource and put solar energy, increased the amount of solar energy on the islands. I think as we move forward to get to 100% renewable energy, the obvious place to go, and a place that gets incredible amounts of wind, is wind power. But that's quite a challenge because the islands are in the ownership of the Duchy of Cornwall, and as you can see, it's a magnificent, I would say unspoiled, but it's man-made, I suppose, in part, landscape. And the challenge of putting wind turbines up in this place is quite a difficult one. So on-island wind power would give us 100% renewable energy, but it's not necessarily acceptable to either the Duchy or the community because of the landscape impact that would have. So is it a small-scale wind power that might give us a solution, or is it wave and tidal power that might be the solution? And Marie and I are doing some work with us at the moment around what is that resource at sea that might allow us to do floating offshore or wave power or tidal flow that would allow us to get to 100% renewable. So we know there's a solution. We're not quite sure what that solution is right now. What we have got, I think, is we've set a template for people wanting to be more conscious about the use of energy and how that energy is sourced. And we've seen that in the take-up that we've had through our business energy efficiency scheme, where businesses are very keen to reduce their electricity bills, but also to generate electricity locally.
And it would be quite something if the Isles of Scilly could be the first net zero community in the UK.
It would be amazing.
It would be amazing.
It would be amazing.
Yeah.
So we're all options are open, and we're still working through those opportunities at the moment. But it's complicated by those different constraints. There are a lot of environmental constraints here. So it's the right thing to do to save the planet, to save the islands, but also wind power might then distract from our tourist industry, for instance, or it might harm our environment in another way. So it's that balancing act at the moment, trying to find the right solutions.
And it strikes me when you're talking that in many ways necessity is the mother of invention. So the fact that you've got that vulnerability with one cable bringing in power prompts you to be more innovative, whereas on the mainland we could just turn the switch or switch from one source of energy to another. There's less imperative to innovate. But everything you said about the water system and the energy system means that necessity is really highlighting the fragility of the system and prompting you to innovate. So,
and you see it every day, you live it, and I notice that when I go to the mainland and I go to a city, I feel so disconnected to the environment, whereas here you're absolutely part of it.
Yeah.
So I think you realise it more living in a small community in a small place. That connection to the environment is much clearer.
It is. Yeah, it really highlights the challenges. So the other sustainability issue for infrastructure then we haven't touched on, except for human waste, is waste.
Yes.
So what about waste? What do you do with all the waste? So everything that comes into the islands feeds the population, generates too much waste. Where does it go? What happens to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, it goes back to the mainland by and large. The only exception to that is glass. So what we do use is we've got a glass crusher, and we use that as a building material.
Right.
So what we're trying to find ways of doing is reusing materials, waste materials, on the island when we can't reduce it. So our waste strategy looks at reduce it, so don't use as much. So we're starting to work with businesses around food waste and saying, how portion sizes, how much waste comes from that sector, how much waste comes from the tourist sector, how can we reduce that? So we reduce the waste, reuse it. So there's a great recycling ethos on the island. There's a Facebook page that the islanders use called For Sale on Scilly, and everything gets recycled around as much as possible, so we reuse as much as possible. And then it goes, if all else fails, it goes to our waste site down at Morwell, where the waste is sorted. And only, I think it was only about 3 years ago that we actually started recycling. So we were very late to the party in terms of recycling, because it's actually more cost effective just to bundle it all together and send it off to the mainland. So we've now started our recycling policy, and we're separating the waste out. That's created some challenges on quite a limited footprint of the site for the waste site, and our intention is to continue to increase recycling rates over the coming years. Once our waste is sorted, it then gets containerised and sent back to the mainland. We did look at an anaerobic digester and gasification plant to see whether it was worthwhile building something of the right scale to meet the island's needs on the island and potentially generate electricity and power from that. We couldn't get that to work. We did a number of feasibility studies, and the technology at the time just couldn't work out the right mix to get us the efficiencies. And when we started looking at how that would work, the solution required diesel to fire it up, and the carbon footprint of the solution was more expensive in carbon terms than it was sending it to the mainland. So we have some challenges around waste. And one of the challenges we have in terms of the tourism sector is, with a lot of self-catering accommodation, bed and breakfasts, hotels, the turnover of mattresses, carpets, furniture is much more intense than you would if it was in a domestic property. So at the end of each season, so come the autumn and at the beginning of each season, we have a massive amount of mattress waste, furniture waste, etc. And one of the challenges we had looking at the anaerobic digester was how we might be able to crush that, mix that up, burn that or whatever to find a solution. And at the moment we haven't got that solution in place. We're still sending things to the mainland. And that goes up to the incinerator at St Dennis.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. So we're still looking for the right waste solution. But for us, our waste reduction strategy is really about reduction, and also thinking about generating food waste. An in-vessel composter is a relatively cheap and easy way of producing compost and getting rid of that waste on island. So the plan for the next few years is to start segregation of the waste even more, so that we can take that waste, create compost and deal with more of our waste on island. But we haven't got a whole island solution yet. Again, innovation's changing all the time. Modular use of incineration or anaerobic digesters, there is something that's scalable that we'll be able to use as we move forward. But in a couple of years' time, come and ask me the question again, and we'll see if we come up with the solution.
It's interesting because it highlights the challenges of the circular economy. Lots of people talk about the circular economy, but here you literally have to deal with your waste. And you either deal with it here, or you have to put it on a boat and send it back to the mainland, which presumably costs quite a lot of money.
It is.
So it must add a lot of cost to the whole process.
I don't know the exact figures for dealing with waste per tonne on the mainland, but it's in the region of about £75 to £78 a tonne, I believe, on the mainland. For us to dispose of waste here on the islands, it's around about £480 a tonne.
Wow.
So it just adds cost
Huge
to
amount.
everything. So if you think about any building projects that we do, it just adds significantly to the way we operate. So everything we do here is expensive. There really is no economic case for the islands other than the fact it's a fantastic place to be. It doesn't stack up financially living here. It's a very expensive place to operate, and so we've just got a box a little bit clever, I think, in terms of our use of resources, and I think that awareness is coming. And the children marched on the council a couple of years ago now, and that was the impetus for the council to say, actually, we need to go to zero carbon. How are we going to do it? And it was great that came from the school and the school kids, rather than the members were listening to that at our council and said, right, how are we going to go about making those changes? So the waste reduction strategy is part of that, and our climate change strategy has been revisited to get that up to date, to say, well, what else do we need to do as we move forward? But it's a massive challenge here because it's not easy without the people, without the resource. So you do have to be a bit more innovative and think outside the box a little bit more.
So the final infrastructure challenge, I suppose, is transport. I was very struck coming on the Selonian. You can smell the diesel going up your nose. You get on a small boat to go to an off island, you smell the diesel.
Yeah.
And worse than that, you might get a plane or a helicopter, which is even more diesel intensive. So is there a solution for sustainable transport for Scilly?
So what we've started with here is to think about what solutions are out there already. Now, the technology that's most advanced, of course, is electric cars. So our first project has been around electric vehicles and the electric infrastructure around the islands. So we managed to get European funding and growth deal funding to put in the infrastructure for charging points for electric vehicles. So we've got around about 30 charging points currently been either been put in or have been put in. We're just coming to the end of that first phase.
And that's on all the islands?
Across all islands, yeah. We've then got funding to test that system and to create some behavioural change by allowing us to purchase some electric vehicles for people to hire as part of a car share scheme. So we start to allow that, giving people choice to allow a behavioural change if possible around cars and vehicles. What was quite apparent is you go in thinking it's electric cars and what's come back from the community is actually, well, what about electric trikes, where we can actually put a trailer on the back, or electric wheelbarrow is another one that's come up. So we're looking at what are the right solutions for in the right places. So you go into an innovative project thinking it's all about the car, and actually what's particularly in the off islands, it's a 4x4 vehicle.
Yeah.
Here it might be an electric wheelbarrow. There are different solutions for different places. So people are starting to think about what those electric solutions might be for vehicles on the roads. And then inter-island and between here and the mainland, we're looking currently at the Levelling Up Fund from government around what that might mean in terms of our opportunities for vessel replacement.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the traditional tripper boats, they're beautiful wooden tripper boats, and they're all fired by diesel at the moment. What is the solution? Could they be fired by electric, and what might that cost, and would they still have the beauty that they have, because they were built many years ago and they have that character. It's not about just bringing a modern new vehicle in, it's about adapting what we've got. So one of the projects we'd like to think about moving into the future is what is the opportunity in terms of the technology for the inter-island boats. But the hot potato at the moment, I suppose, is our vessel replacement, because the existing Selonian and the Green Maritha are quite old and they need to be replaced at some stage. And the technology in terms of that sector is not that well developed yet. You'll have heard there's lots of people talking about ferries in Norway and other places where they've got electric ferries, but for us it's about scaling it right for the islands and finding the right solution. And even if the technology is not there now, how can we make sure that any vessels that replace what's here at the moment can be adapted to use low carbon technologies? And I think it was Simon Cowell on one of the travel shows was saying, the obvious place for an electric plane would be the Isles of Scilly, wouldn't it? And I was thinking, come on commercial sector, come and tell me that you've got a solution. And I think one of the Scottish islands has beaten us to it. They've got some government funding in Scotland to serve, I think, the Orkneys with an electric plane. So I was kicking myself that we weren't first in the queue there, but I think that will come in time as the production lines increase and the technology
and
improves.
the cost comes down,
and then it becomes viable here.
Yeah.
Because you haven't got massive visitor numbers. That's what you've got to remember here. You know, even at the peak of the season, we've got about 6,000 visitors. We might get 100,000 visitors a year. It's got to stack up financially for people to make those investments. And I think the economies of scale doesn't always work out as well here as it might do, say, in the Scottish Islands. So we are, you know, we're put at a disadvantage because of our scale. It's an advantage, our scale, because of our location, its beauty, but actually it's a disadvantage when it comes to doing anything that's economically viable.
Yeah. So you just touched on it there, but obviously this economy now depends almost entirely on tourism. So you might have 6,000 visitors coming a week or 100,000 in the season, and relative to the population of 2,000, that's a massive gap. What are the particular challenges of a tourist-based economy for Scilly, and sustainability in particular, I'm thinking?
I think the islands have adapted to tourism well, and the numbers are actually lower than they used to be, but I think it puts a massive strain on the infrastructure and the resources. But it also puts a social strain on it as well, because it means there's a lot of seasonal jobs, and it means we've got a very seasonal economy. About 85% of our income comes from the tourist sector.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely all about tourism.
Yeah.
But that does have its challenges, and like you do on the mainland, if you look at those places where you've got high numbers of tourism and you've got a lot of second homes, it means in the winter months it's a difficult economy. So this is Sleepy Hollow often in the winter, and you know everybody on the street because there's a much lower population. But in the summer months when the tourists come in, they're very much welcomed as part of our economy because that's our bread and butter. That's where our income comes from, that sustains us through the year. But because we've got limited housing, it does mean that we have to attract seasonal workers. So a lot of students come in to work over the summer months, in the hospitality sector in particular, and workers from Europe come and work as well. And there's a flower picking as well alongside the tourism sector. So quite a lot of it's a low wage economy. And so you've got this dichotomy, if you like, of, you know, probably a higher end tourism sector and quite lowly paid local jobs, and that does create a little bit of a tension when it comes to accessing housing, for instance, where, you know, it's very expensive to get a house on Scilly. There's a very limited housing market and a very limited rental market, and the price is high, but the incomes are low. So this pressure that tourism's put on the infrastructure in terms of housing infrastructure has created a problem in terms of the staff and resources, the people resource to serve that tourism sector. But in terms of water, we've already touched on that, so demand does peak. Electricity demand peaks actually in March and April of each year as the tourism sector wakes up and the properties start to be heated, and we start bringing those properties up to standard, and all the workmen doing the work bring the properties up to their sort of high spec for the season. So we manage that tension quite well, I think, and you know, there's a great expectation at the start of the season and a welcoming of those visitors. By October, everyone's quite exhausted. It's a tension that's been managed for many years, but it does put pressure on the existing facilities.
And I suppose that gap between the low wage economy and the cost of the housing and the cost of living is more extreme here than in Cornwall in a way. And also it's more apparent because in Cornwall you've got the population moving for jobs across a bigger area, whereas here you have to bring in your labour and you have to accommodate that labour. So it's a much more intense process again.
Yeah, and it's not like you can just go to the next parish or the next area because we're 28 miles away from the mainland, so you can't commute easily. So it does create that tension. And it does mean that people are living in substandard housing often in the summer months. We don't know where a lot of our workers are. We've started licensing our housing multiple occupation over the last few years to bring the standards up to make sure people are safe, because there's always that concern, isn't there, that people are, you know, living in inadequate accommodation and at risk. So there is that accommodation tension through the summer months. In the winter months, you can get a lovely holiday let over the winter, but come the summer, it goes back into the tourism sector. And this year that's created a bigger tension than ever, and we've seen public sector workers hit the national press, in fact, around having to move back to the mainland. One of our staff moved back to the mainland this week and is working remotely because there is no accommodation for this season. Staycation is big this year, and a lot of property owners have kept their properties for the tourism sector as opposed to hosting.
And there'll be 100% occupancy, I imagine, all
it's
year.
Fully booked. Pretty much fully booked this year. Which is great on the one hand, but again,
has these challenges.
The biggest issue for us is housing, and when we talk about infrastructure, to me, housing's at the very heart of that. And people forget that on the mainland because you can go to the next area, you can go to the next district, you can go to the next town, whereas you can't do that here.
So it's very pressing.
It is.
The final thing I wanted to ask you about with tourism was, though, how you manage the environment.
So in terms of the marine environment, I think one of the things we've had challenges with, particularly this winter when we've had fin whales and humpback whales and lots of seals and dolphins and porpoises, is knowing what the rules are of engagement. So, you know, not getting too close, not making sure that we cause any disturbance to that habitat. So I think once numbers increase of visitors, that challenge of making sure that we're protecting and providing the right secure environment for the nature to grow and prosper is really important. And I think sometimes it's almost like you need a marine code, like the countryside code, to make sure that people understand what those rules are. And by and large, those people that are operating the facilities and the boats here know what the rules are, but sometimes visitors maybe go out in the kayaks, get too close to seals, disturb seagrass, etc., etc. So it's just helping understand what the parameters are, what the rules of engagement are, enjoy the environment, and as I think someone once said, wasn't it, take only photographs, leave only footprints, or even paddle marks on the sea. So I think for us, there's that challenge of education, information, making sure people are aware of what's important, how they can help protect the environment, as well as supporting us in protecting the environment as we move forward. And on the land, I mean, a lot of the environment is very accessible in terms of footpath access, beach access. It's just understanding, you know, not taking away flowers, not disturbing habitats as people are here. And generally our visitors are very respectful. We get a lot of repeat visitors that have come for many years and many generations, and they understand those rules. I think last year with COVID, we had quite a lot of new visitors that came, and it was just making sure we had the information out there to make sure that people can enjoy the environment and protect the environment in a way that safeguards nature. And tries not to cause any damage to the nature and environment they come to explore and to admire.
Yeah, thank you very much. I thought you might have a question you want to ask our students who are watching these videos. Is there anything you would like to ask them?
I think for us it's really, we've got so many challenges, it's understanding what those solutions are. So some great work being done over the winter months around exploring how visitors could contribute to nature recovery, for instance, or to environmental protection. What are our options? How can we solve some of our infrastructure problems? How could we solve our issues around water or sewage or energy generation? How can we solve some of our issues around innovative housing, zero carbon homes? How can the council become a zero carbon council? Everyone's signed up to this, but we're not really sure how to get there. So we're going to do our climate change strategy, we're going to do an action plan, we've got little steps to get us there. But what are the big ideas? What are the different ideas? What are the things we could do differently in an island location where we can look at things in the round, we can look at those interconnections and find holistic solutions. So some thinking around what those solutions might be for the islands would be really great. We're quite aware of our problems. We're not quite sure of what our solutions are. We know what some of the tiny steps are, but we've not probably thought about those bigger solutions. And Wavetricity, Alina, it's a good example of thinking outside about a utility platform. What are those other solutions that we might have? If wind power is not possible in turbine form, what might be the other solutions? You know, what is the low visual solution for wind turbines? What is a solution that might provide us with an alternative for solar? You know, is it solar slates, or what's the technology? Where's technology going? Is it about coverings on houses so we can generate electricity from the actual facade of a house rather than from the roof? So just giving us an insight as to what's out there, what are the solutions that might be coming on the horizon, so that maybe we can be more innovative as we move forward.
Well, that is a brilliant challenge for our students. They're either studying environmental science or geography, and they're all issues that they can take away and explore, and they would make brilliant dissertation projects. So I hope lots of them will get inspired and do work which is going to be really helpful in moving Scilly forward and making it the most innovative space for net zero and a sustainable future.
That would be brilliant. We'd love to hear your ideas.
So thanks very much, Nicola. It's been great having you with us today.
Thank you very much.